Welcome to EdUp Curriculum. I am your host, Nicole Poff. I am so excited about today's guest. Personal note, today's guest, we worked together at a college many, many years ago. And I was just a little newbie in the field. And I remember sitting across from her at a board meeting, just being like, not even a board meeting, just a meeting, and being like, I want to be just like her when I grow up. So full circle moment for me, Christina. Thank you so much for being on this podcast. I have just admired your work, literally admired your work for years. So I am so excited to dig in. So today's guest is Kristina Powers. Kristina, for listeners who may not know your work, can you share a little bit more about your journey and then obviously how you became focused on institutional effectiveness?
Thanks, Nicole. So thrilled to be on EdUp Curriculum with the Nicole Poff. I know, can you believe that's like almost 10 years ago that we have met, and a pandemic ago. Who knew?
Yeah.
Thrilled to be on the show, and thanks for asking about how does one get into institutional effectiveness? It's not like anybody's out there dreaming as a small child, I'm going to be an institutional effectiveness professional when I grow up. But it started out in institutional research, which is essentially the data engine of colleges and universities. So many institutional researchers, their job is to help leaders understand what the data was actually telling us about student experience, about their experience with the curriculum, their success, enrollment, and institutional performance. So it's reporting and digging into what happened. And over time, I realized something important, that institutions don't just struggle because they lack data. They struggle because they lack an alignment around the data. And so it was this realization that pulled me into that institutional effectiveness space. And this is where folks can start to understand what institutional effectiveness is. This is where the work shifts from simply producing a report and digging into and disaggregating into shaping the decision. So rather than saying, okay, well, if we do nothing and we stay on this trajectory, here's where we're headed, but rather, well, where do we want to go and how do we intervene to get there? So Nicole, I can't believe it. I've been now in higher ed for 25 years studying how institutions, right? It goes by so fast. I'm studying how institutions perform across roles in research, including finance, accreditation, and administration. And what fascinates me is that institutional performance, it's not random. It actually follows a pattern. And so institutional effectiveness isn't about measuring activity and then doing some reports. It's really about improving those decisions and having confidence in the decisions that you're making.
I love that. I always say higher ed, we have a lot of data that just sits on the shelves. It's like it sits there. It just, maybe we're overwhelmed with it. Maybe we don't quite know what to do with it. So it's interesting that you started in the research part, because I feel like there is a lot that can happen after that that maybe doesn't. But what I really want to chat about is you created something called the Powers Index. Can you explain what it is and what inspired you to develop it?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So the Powers Index of College and University Performance, it's a framework to help identify those signals of whether an institution is under struggle, and straining, or strength. And so there are 12 signals that reveal whether the institution is converting their expertise into institutional momentum, or some areas that they really are kind of at a friction point where they need to come together and address. So the inspiration, it really came from a pretty simple question. Why are some institutions with awesome, amazing people who are so dedicated to this field of higher education. Why are those institutions with strong missions, why do they still struggle to perform? Because it seems on the outside they have all the right ingredients. And so after studying those institutions for several decades now, I've realized that the issue wasn't intelligence, and it's not about commitment and passion for the field. It's about misalignment between expertise, leadership, and those data decision making systems. What you had said earlier was that there's just so much data just sitting there. When there's misalignment because that information sitting there, that can cause institutions to not be able to move forward. So the index really just helps leaders to see those signals early enough to react rather than be surprised by them in some kind of a crisis.
That's awesome. How hard is it to use the Power Index? Like if I'm a provost and I'm listening and, hey, this sounds cool, I want to see. How hard is it to use? Do I need to go to institutional research and gather thousands of documents, or is it relatively easy?
I love it. Nicole, thanks for asking that question, because getting over that hurdle of, well, how much work is involved? And it's really meant to be that framework. So somebody can go to kppowers.com right now and click on the Powers Index, and you can see that framework, and you can see the 12 signals, 4 domains that anchor those 12 signals, and start reading the description for each of those signals immediately and start working through where is our institution struggling? Where do we have strain? Where do we have strength as well? And every institution is, of course, different, unique snowflakes. And as somebody within the institution, you can begin to have that shared language with the index. And those signals emulate from accreditation reports, audited financials, and other federal filings as common issues that institutions have strength and strain around.
Awesome. So they can just go to your website and get started.
And get started.
Easy. There's no excuses here. I'd love to explore how curriculum shows up in that framework, because this is EdUp Curriculum. Where does it fit? Where does it fit within the Power Index?
Yeah, and I anticipated that you might ask a curriculum question, being the EdUp Curriculum podcast. So I'm so glad that you asked about that, because curriculum, of course, is at the heart of student learning. It is why we are in higher education, having taught in higher ed for about 12 plus years, face-to-face, hybrid, online, as well as other professional development courses. The curriculum matters. And so when we see healthy institutions with regards to curriculum review is looked at as structured and continuous. This is not a kind of one and done episodic, oh, well, it went through the curriculum committee, and so now we're done for the next X number of years. That it is ongoing. The other place where you see healthy institutions with curriculum our faculty conversations include evidence that they are pulling in those data points. So item number 1 on the index is monitoring. Number 2 is transparency. So they're pulling in enrollment patterns, course completion rates, workforce demand. So first, it's 1, knowing what to monitor and pull into those conversations, and then 2, being transparent about it, and 3, having that employee expertise, that shared language to begin to discuss it. And so it's that shared language with both faculty and leadership. So institutions can launch, evolve, or sunset programs without having a lot of institutional drama or problems, because they're regularly looking at this information. Can I go on the flip side and talk about strain in this category too? What kind of some signals to look for? So curriculum decisions are driven primarily by internal politics rather than student or market evidence. That's an initial signal of strain. So again, if we get back to the core mission about student learning, what I love about students over time, universally, they will always tell you exactly how they feel and how they feel about their learning. They will share that unfiltered,
Yep.
whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. The other indicator is programs continue indefinitely, even though enrollment or outcomes decline. So many times, folks will say, "Why are we still continuing with X program? We have the data." That sound or that issue just gets louder and louder until it's dealt with, and it begins to show up in the index with things like the financials, because students, of course, aren't enrolling in programs that they're no longer interested in. Two other kind of indicators: curriculum committees, when they're separate from strategic planning and budgeting, and that they're not integrated and having conversations that are connected, it's hard for that to not impact enrollment and then ultimately financials. And then finally, program innovation, when it's happening really slowly, or there's defenses of all the reasons in the world why we can't do something in terms of adding a new course, new program, and making changes. So healthy institutions, they're evolving curriculum deliberately. Struggling institutions, you'll find that they're defending it emotionally.
I think that's the story of my life. Um, I, I, I literally think that's the story of my life. A
I'm
lot of
glad it's
times
resonating with you.
yeah, a lot of times we'll come into an institution and there's these like legacy programs that have 3 students, and they're just trickling from course to course. And then there's faculty bloat with that program. And you're just like, how are we still doing this, right? How are we not putting these resources, moving these faculty? It's hard. It's actually like pains my soul to watch these decisions being made. How do you, again, egos are involved, friendships are involved, legacy, value of maybe the degrees that students don't value. Like a lot of people, they say, I think this degree is important. Well, do our students think that this degree is important? How do you have those conversations where you can objectively, I mean, I have to think that at some point they are aware that there's only 3 students in this program, but yet every single term they make the decision to maintain it, right? So how do you have those conversations in a non-threatening way? Is there a good way to do this?
Yeah, so you are identifying and ticking off several of those 12 signals in the Powers Index. So it first begins with monitoring those enrollments, right? So in your example, 3, then being transparent about it to have a cadence of sharing that information. So if you have a culture of regularly sharing that information, then it doesn't feel defensive or somebody's, bringing it out with a hidden agenda. If you're doing it all along, it is regular routine, and those numbers then jump out at you. The signal number 3 is about employee expertise. And so now we have a shared language of, well, what does 3 mean? Is it and then it becomes a trade-off between, well, some other program is subsidizing that, and are we okay with that? I worked at an institution where the social work program was being subsidized by the business school, and the college or the university said, we are in a rural area, and that is important to us to subsidize social workers, because there's no other way that the social workers in that community would have been as attracted to the area. In fact, they were a high feeder program for that community, and that's a purposeful trade-off versus this program is, has a small number, and what does that mean? So in that instance, that community said, we value this as part of our mission of serving the our broader community.
That makes sense. And I've talked to universities just like that who are like exact situation. Something else, and I know I'm throwing random questions at you.
That's okay.
Sometimes I come into a university and they are kind of split decision of we want to spend money on curriculum. Are we revising current programs, right? Maybe we know that in our F&P program we have a 50% student drop around clinicals, right? Are we spending the money there to revamp that program? And then kind of the other side to that is there's the other party, let's say, who says, no, those already have students. Let's do new product. Let's do new degrees, right? How does the power index help them figure out like what's the best decision for them ultimately? Because if they have a fixed budget and they're looking at two paths, revise current programs or put it into new product, how do you make that choice?
Yeah. So I think in terms of the powers index, it's not going to help you make that nuanced of a decision, but it can help provide a framework in looking at the economic factors in your area of what is meaningful to our the where students are getting jobs, the communities that we're serving, those enrollment demographic shifts for enrollment, and then how that's impacting the finance. So this comes back to some strategic planning as well, like what are we focused on? And everything can't be a priority, right? So if we have a list of 20 items, then they all can't be number one in there. But I would encourage in that scenario, where do we spend our budget? You can role play with the framework to say, well, if we make this decision, what do we think will happen to these 12 signals? Which ones will increase in strength and which ones will ultimately end up in strain from this decision? And are we okay with that? Is that meeting our current mission and the goals that we're setting out to achieve right now?
I love that it goes back to kind of those 12 because a lot of times the way that I see people attempt to figure this out is projections, which is kind of hearsay, right? Like we're going to guess if we revise this program and spend X amount of dollars, we're going to guess that maybe X amount of students get through it more, right? And then that shows revenue. But over here, we're going to guess if we spend X amount on new product development, this might bring in X amount of students. And it feels a little bit like a guessing game that all comes back to ROI. So I love that your framework, it feels like, and maybe I'm missing the mark here, it feels like it brings it back beyond just a strictly budgetary, line item.
You've got it 110%, Nicole, because a lot of folks we're focused on the finances right now, right? Their higher education has a lot of struggle happening, and so the finances are what many institutions are rightfully so focused on. But in the powers index, if you think about it, like a clock, we first start out in the data quadrant, then move over to the governance quadrant, the environment, and then the fiscal quadrant is last. That is the last place where something bubbles up. And by the time it's moved into the fiscal quadrant, we have missed several opportunities to make an impact earlier on. And those fiscal data points are such lagging indicators. Take, for example, a set of audited financials. Very important, must be done. The transactions that happened in those audited financials were 18 months prior in some cases, or from earlier in that fiscal year. So to be exclusively focused or largely focused on just the ROI misses the whole other three quadrants and the opportunity, because it's all about that institutional effectiveness.
I love this. So you're trying, yeah, I love this so much because you're right. By time it's showing up on the balance sheet, it's it's you're late to the game.
You are so late to the game. And it feels awkward for a lot of folks in higher ed because it doesn't, to exclusively focus on the finances. I mean, it feels like we're missing other parts. And I think a lot of people recognize finance absolutely has to be part of the equation. The days of that being a back office function that isn't fully integrated with all things within the college and university, those days are gone. We need the finance folks right at the table, right next to us, really understanding the whole student success life cycle and everything curriculum, academic about it. So if we are just focusing on one quadrant, we're just missing several opportunities.
Well, and I mean, I would imagine, again, this is your area of expertise, but if you're making decisions out of a place of financial, I don't want to say desperation, that's probably dramatic, but if you're making decisions based upon your budget or lack of budget or lack of revenue, you're probably making decisions that would look a lot better or different than if you didn't have to make them that way. It's like the decision of, do I eat at a restaurant or do I eat a cup of noodles? And oftentimes, if you don't have the budget to eat a cup of noodle or to eat at a restaurant, you have to eat a cup of noodles. That's a bad analogy. But
I get it though. I get it.
Yeah. You would make different decisions, I feel like, as a provost, and I'm always thinking about like what's in the best interest of the student. It's probably hard to act in the best interest of the student if you're having to focus on recovering financially.
And that's why the finance quadrant is number 4. And that's why data is number 1, because if we're not paying attention to the data, the problem gets louder and louder and spills over into governance. Okay, well, now people have to make up for the lack of using data. Okay, well, if they're not going to do it, then now we're into environmental external factors. Now other people outside our institutions are responding. Students are enrolling, they're not enrolling. So this isn't all negative. These can be positive things as well. And then the real kind of proof shows up in those lagging indicators of financials. So you give yourself more optionality by working further upstream and starting with a really strong data culture.
I love that. What if someone currently is operating from the space of just like, hey, I'm trying to pay our bills. It's really hard to get upstream when all I'm looking at is paying our faculty and keeping our campus running. Like, how would you still say that is a scary moment, but still start at point 1?
So you've got to be working in all 12 signals at the same time almost. So, and certainly colleges and universities have find which signals are of strength and start amplifying those, and then work at the adjacent signals next to those. So if you've got strong executive leadership, then start working at the signals next to that executive leadership signal. And so you've unfortunately kind of got to be operating on all cylinders, which many folks are right now. Many institutions, and certainly many leaders that are still worn out from the pandemic, that they never fully recovered from that. That's still operating in all four quadrants, and this is why it's not one person's problem to solve. It is not one particular leader. It truly will take a team effort to turn those strain signals into strength signals.
This is this if a university could get behind this, I feel this would be transformative to them. You know, especially because I have conversations off the camera all day with schools who are facing real challenges. So what you're telling me, I'm like, it's kind of tugging at my heart because I'm like, I hear the stories all day. And what you're proposing, it's like, yeah, okay, if this can solve it, wow, or begin to, right, to get them in better shape.
That's right, because Nicole, I've spent 25 years in the colleges and universities, front student facing, lots of Excel cells, over 25 years, many days, more than 1 million cells a day that my eyes would be working with and reviewing. And the people that know their institutions the best are the folks that are in those institutions. And this framework gives them a shared language and a roadmap to start having those conversations. No one will know more about the institution than the folks that are in that institution. Other people can come into the equation and learn, of course, but the folks that are at that institution today, the listeners right now, the people you have to work with are at your institution. Those are the ones that you need to be reaching out to and connecting and start talking through the Powers Index framework.
It's brilliant. And I really do think this can transform a lot of universities. It's relative. I mean, I know this is your brainchild, and so this is the work of 25 years, right? But in terms of how long has this been like available for people to use publicly? Like it's not too long, right?
It's not. I released it earlier this year, in January, but this was actually a project I had started in the pandemic. And then, oddly enough, under a period of uncertainty and strain for many institutions, and I started a smaller version of it for myself to help support the institutions that I was working with. And Nicole, it's become really clear, I'm one person. I can't support all 6,000 colleges and universities as much as I would love to, as much as you would love to support all 6,000 out there. And so the idea behind the index is, how do I help an industry, an entire sector make a difference at scale when I can't be available to them, and for free, right? This, putting the framework out there so that others can start using it, start leveraging it, and start sharing their stories about how they're taking that framework and really being creative with it. So I can't wait to start to hear how institutions are leveraging it.
Me too. And it's so generous of you. I almost see like a workbook, a part two where, people are working through, and I haven't seen it yet. So, but I just, think about if a university was adopting this, like, there's a book that I really love. It's called Becoming a Student Ready College, Student Ready Campus. And it's all
Mm-hmm.
about, have you read it? Like, instead of blaming our students or saying, are they ready for us? Are we ready for them? Right? We kind of flip that narrative to really focus on our language and our institutional culture to be student ready versus making them ready for us. I can see a world, Christina, where it's like becoming a power index college, right? Where you're rallying, you're a provost and you have the book the Power Index book, right? And you're rallying your leaders and your faculty around this cultural shift, because that's what you're describing to me is a cultural, you're not going to fill out a worksheet and solve your issues.
That's right. But I kind of hear you suggesting some curriculum around the Powers Index.
I'm suggesting curriculum. I'm suggesting a speaking tour. I'm suggesting a book. I'm suggesting all the things for the Powers Index. Christina, speaking of books, you are on your 8th book, and you've coordinated with over 100 contributing authors, which is a lot. What has inspired so many books, and secondary to that, what is the current book?
I get this question, Nicole, because people are like, what's the deal behind the books? Who writes this many books? Who has this many books in them? And then I remind them there are 100+ people who have joined me in that endeavor. So this is not a one-woman show. So I want to be sure. So thank you for mentioning the 100+ folks. But I really see the books as infrastructure for higher education. It's not just about personal publications. There are so many people, Nicole, that are doing scholar practitioner work that I've come across. And there's, unless they submit to a journal, which is fine to do, but it has a very long runway. You might not see your article in print for 2 years, which feels like an entire lifetime ago. So with those extraordinary practitioners, I want to bring forward and give them a spot to share their insights and their knowledge and bring that forward. I don't have all the answers, but I know a lot of really smart people to bring them together on a particular topic. So my role has been to convene those voices and create a platform where that expertise can be captured and shared. So we've got more than 100 chapter authors, as you mentioned, across 8 books so far and counting. And it's just been really energizing to have that kind of a network. All of those folks, I proudly have put them on my website, the instituteforeffectiveness.org. The current book is a topic that institutions are struggling with. So I try to pick a topic that will really help many institutions. And this one is called Priority Partners, Turning Vendor Spending into Mission Strength. The premise is pretty simple. Colleges spend millions with vendors every single year, but they very rarely align those partnerships intentionally with institutional strategy. And partnerships is on the Powers Index because how you're spending your money in that fiscal quadrant really matters. So we move from every dollar an institution spends really is a strategic decision, whether leaders treat it that way or not. So helping them to give them tools, frameworks, content that help them to have more informed, sharper conversations with their vendors. And the vendors, they want to help colleges win. These are smart, creative. By the way, they have college degrees. They've graduated from these institutions. They want to help their colleges in the higher education sector win.
I love it. And, you've been kind of teasing this book out on LinkedIn, and I feel like you'll share this author, and I'm like, I love that person. And then 3 days later, you're like, and this is another, chapter author. And I'm like, I love that person too. I feel like you probably get my notifications all day long because every time you release a new author for this book, I love them.
I'm glad that you love all of the chapter authors for this book. I'm pretty keen on them as well. And I've just been super fortunate to continue to meet and seek out folks that I see trying to put their thought leadership out there. And so when I see that, I'll reach out to them, and especially aligning it, of course, with a chapter in the book. But I'm really excited about this group, this book, and the the way in which they're tackling a topic that doesn't have a lot of resources. So across the feedback from most of the chapter authors has been there's not a lot to rely on for giving advice to college and university leaders about how best that they can work with vendors. So we've just really been focusing on unpacking the problems and issues that most institutions encounter when just beginning that process. And there's a lot of choices out there, and part of that is just parsing through, well, what's important to me? How do I figure out what's important so I can share and communicate that with to vendors so we can see, do we have a good fit?
Love it. I don't know if we've mentioned this. When does it come out and how do people order it?
Yeah, it's coming out this summer, so summer 2026, and they can get onto the newsletter that I have on instituteforeffectiveness.org. They can join onto the newsletter, and I'll be sharing updates and behind the scenes comments from the chapter authors, and it will be posted on Amazon.
Awesome. And I'm going to endorse your newsletter. I don't read many newsletters. I do read your newsletters. In fact, my husband and I were driving the other day and he's like, I think you need to start a newsletter. What would you do? And I said, if I started a newsletter, here would be the model. Let me send it to you. This would be the model newsletter because it's not clutter. It's no fuss. It's high value. It says where you're going to be, what your podcast was about, where you like it just, yeah, it's no clutter. It's direct and to the point. So I fully endorse your newsletter.
Thank you, my friend. And I look forward to your newsletter. I can imagine what yours is going to be like with curriculum tips and behind the scenes and how to align your PLOs. I can't wait.
Yeah, I don't know if I will do it yet, but if I do, know that you
Let
are
me
the
know.
model.
I'll be your first sign up, my friend.
I love it. I love it. All right, we are wrapping up. I have one more question for you.
Okay.
And this one is probably one of my favorites. So you've worked with and researched so many institutions over the last 25 years. What's one of the biggest lessons you've learned about higher education?
So many things to choose from, Nicole. Lots. I would say what's coming to mind in my current work is institutions rarely are struggling because of intelligence, right? There's a lot of smart people at colleges and universities, lots of advanced degrees, brilliant, dedicated people. But the issue that seems to be surfacing right now is it what often breaks down is how decisions are made, the structures that convert insight into action, those governance policies, procedures, protocols, they are being exposed. And so if there were strong governance practices, then that's serving an institution well. And if there's weaker governance practices, decision making, it's really putting strain throughout the institution. So when we've got expertise and leadership and incentive alignments, institutions are just able to move with greater clarity. When they don't, institutions are becoming slow, reactive, and then that's where some conflict comes in. So bringing this back to institutional effectiveness, it's really about one thing: creating the conditions where good people can make good decisions consistently and confidently.
I love that. That's gold. Gold. Christina, thank you so much for joining us. For the listeners, so many takeaways. Go look at the Powers Index, subscribe to Christina's newsletter, buy her book in summer, or go look at all on her website. There's all the contributing authors. There's all the past books. Really just a resource hub if you're feeling like you're making decisions out of financial, desperation, or you're just wondering about the kind of the general health of your college. Um, so generous of you, Christina, to put this out into the world for free.
Thanks so much for having me on EdUp Curriculum, Nicole. So good to talk with you.
You too. Thanks, Christina.